Good morning, everybody. I hope you're having a good Thursday. As I mentioned on Tuesday, this lecture is actually pre-recorded because I have a prior commitment at the farm for my research project that I have to do. It's the last day of my project, so I'm sad that I can't be there with you live today, but I am going to go ahead and have this lecture ready for you. So I know after last class, some of you heard my dog. And since this is the last time I will be recording at home and he will be interfering, I just thought that if you all wanted to actually meet him, this is Trigger. Can you say hi? Yeah, good boy. And he will not be joining us at any time in the future, so he won't be a distraction in class at all. But for those of you that want to see him, that's him. So I'm going to go ahead and get started with today's material. We're going to cover Chapter 1 today. And so if you have your book, you can kind of follow along because most of the material is from the book. But if not, you can always go back and kind of review the chapter in the notes later. So. Okay, so you might probably recognize this picture from the front of your textbook. So like I said, all of the lecture material is going to be coming from your textbook. I might supplement some material from other sources occasionally to kind of maybe update a few things. But for the most part, this is where all your material is going to come from. So section 1 is going to focus on animals in society. And so just to give a quick little introduction again, for those of you who are not able to join us on Tuesday, I'll be kind of brief because I know a lot of you don't really need to hear this again. But I'm originally from Victoria, Virginia, so the South Side area. I actually went to governor's school while I was in high school, so I went to the Daniel campus for my last 2 years of high school for half the day. So I'm a little bit familiar with SVCC. And I got a bachelor's from Virginia Tech in animal and poultry science and a master's from Virginia Tech in animal and poultry science, where I kind of focused on developmental nutrition in swine. And I'm a current PhD candidate at NC State working with swine nutrition. So that's just a little bit about me for those of you that weren't here on Tuesday. So just to kind of dive into things, I'd like to start with talking about what animal science actually is. So there are a lot of different definitions out there and ways that people define it. So I've kind of come up with this definition that combines all of those. So animal science is the study of the scientific principles that underlie the breeding and husbandry of agricultural animals and the production and distribution of animal products. So it's a very broad definition that encompasses a lot of different areas that we'll dive into in the semester. So why study animal science? So one of the big, huge reasons is that we have an increasing world population that is growing at a staggering rate. We'll talk about this a little more in the lecture, but we have more people to feed and more people on this planet than ever before. So animal science is extremely important because people need to eat, and animal science helps make that happen. As the countries are becoming more developed with the increasing population, increasing urbanization, more people are able to access meat products and buy animal products because more development means more money, more urbanization, and more people that can actually afford to eat meat products. Loss of farmland kind of goes hand in hand with this as well because as places become more developed, there's more urbanization, and farmland is actually developed and used for other things other than agricultural purposes. So therefore, animal production needs to be more efficient than ever because we need to feed more people with less land. And even that means fewer animals. So animal science is really, really important to figure out ways to do that. So today I'm going to cover Chapter 1, which is just going to give you a very brief introduction. We're going to talk about the world population and how it's growing, hunger in the world, and the importance of agriculture and how it fits in with those things. So the world population is currently over 7.5 billion people, and it is growing at a rate of approximately 1.2% per year. And that's pretty incredible. I remember, I think in high school I learned 6.5 billion. We're already up to 7.5. So between 1960 and 2007, the world population grew by 3.6 billion people. And the growth rate is slowing. However, the total population is still expected to reach 10 billion people by 2050, which is really not that far off. So this is just a representation on a graph. You actually have a similar one in your book, but this one has been updated as of August 2017, but it hasn't changed much from the one that's in your book. So as you can see, where we sit, we're right in here at the 7.5 billion. And you can easily see that if we keep going at this rate, by 2050, we are going to be approaching the 10 billion mark. So we are going to need to have a lot of food for a lot of people. So world hunger is a big issue. There are more than 800 million people, mainly in Africa, Asia, and Latin America, that do not get enough to eat on a daily basis. In 1960, there were 3 billion people, and 3 billion people with an average caloric intake of 2,000 kilocalories per day in the developing world. In 1998, with 6 billion people, their average intake per day was 2,700 kilocalories. So more people, and those people are consuming more food. So as I mentioned a little bit earlier, urbanization has also become a problem because in the developing world, there has been tremendous growth of cities. Especially Tokyo in Japan, it's 35 million people. Mexico City, it's 19 million people. Mumbai, formerly Bombay, India, is 19 million. New York is 19 million. And Sao Paulo, Brazil, is 19 million. By 2030, the world population in urban areas will grow to 5 billion people, which will create sort of these megacities. So the U.S. population is currently around 302 million people with a 0.9% growth rate. And this rate of population growth was much greater early in the history of the United States because when colonists were coming over and everything, there were fewer people, so it was very easy to double that population. So the growth rate has kind of slowed down since then, but still a lot of people. Between 1660 and 1880, the U.S. population had a population growth rate of 3%, which is a lot higher than what it is now. So in the U.S., we have had a lot of development, and urban areas continue to grow. And I know there are skyscrapers and everything, but you can really only grow so much up and before you have to start expanding out. And this has been causing a problem because you have agricultural lands that are being replaced by residential subdivisions developed using larger lots, surrounded by malls, office parks, restaurants, and new roads. And people kind of vote with their feet. They move to new subdivisions, shop in new stores, eat at new restaurants, and work in office parks. So if there's a demand for all of these new places and this, new development, and people are actually going to these places, then there almost seems to be less of a demand for the agricultural land because people don't realize how incredibly important it is to have that land to be able to provide people with food. So there have been concerns about what's termed urban sprawl and the loss of farmland. One thing that has been kind of discussed is smart growth, which is growth that's focused in planned communities with town centers and high population densities. And it would allow walking or bicycling to stores, work, or other activities, and greater use of public transit. So it would kind of keep everything in a smaller area so that we didn't have quite as much urban sprawl and loss of farmland. And it's similar to new urbanism, the concept of communities where you live, work, and play kind of all in the same area. So greenfield development is when a housing development, mall, or factory is constructed on agricultural or other land that has not been previously developed. The advantages of this is that there are no issues of contamination because that land hasn't been developed before, and it is less costly than brownfield development. And brownfield development would be new development on land that's been previously used for factories and things like that. So the disadvantage with brownfield development is that you have significant contamination of the soil with chemical toxicants because it has been developed before and used for other things. So hunger in the world is a huge, huge problem. The United Nations Food and Agricultural Organization, or the FAO, estimates, and this was an estimate from 2002, that the number of undernourished people in the world is 840 million, which is a very, very high number. Most people who receive inadequate nutrition live in the developing world. Issues that are linked to hunger and undernutrition and malnutrition include low birth weight babies and higher infant mortality, impaired neural and cognitive development, and hungry children are inattentive and do not typically learn as well as children that have been fed and adequately nourished. So children can also have reduced growth and stunting, and so that can cause problems, especially in the developing world, where it's almost harder for them to be successful and to make things change because you have all of these problems caused by malnutrition. So the Millennium Development Goals was based on the United Nations Millennium Declaration in 2000. The first goal that they had was to eradicate extreme poverty and hunger. In 1990, an estimated 815 million people were hungry and get inadequate nutrition. Also, 28.3% of all people in the world lived on less than $1 per year. So kind of echoing what I said in a few slides before this, hunger can actually cause poverty. While poverty can be a cause of hunger, they kind of go, hand in hand. So about 45% of children in India are malnourished or underweight. And the FAO calculates that malnourishment reduces adult productivity in a number of Asian countries by about 3% of GDP, which is gross domestic product. And so, like I said, these kind of go together. It's kind of more kind of like the chicken or the egg, which came first scenario. Not only does is hunger caused by poverty, but hunger itself can actually then in turn be a cause of poverty because people cannot function as well when they're not properly nourished. So just a little bit about food security and what that is. So the United Nations FAO definition of food security is that food security exists when all people at all times have physical, social, and economic access to sufficient, safe, and nutritious foods to meet their dietary needs and food preferences for an active and healthy life. According to the FAO, about 40% of the world's population actually raises its own food. So, therefore, there's a huge importance of agriculture. There has been a tremendous progress in the ability of the world's farmers to be able to feed growing populations with large increases in total agriculture production and a key one, production efficiency. The Green Revolution has had a dramatic effect on people's lives in the developing world. So, what is the Green Revolution? The Green Revolution is using improved genetics for agricultural purposes. And this actually stems from research that was conducted in Mexico and India that resulted in wheat and rice that had greater yields and were more resistant to parasites. So they were much better than previous types of wheat and rice. These improved genetics resulted in greatly increased production, reducing hunger by increasing the availability of food and also at a lower price. So to kind of continue on the Green Revolution, early in the 20th century, there were research-based advances in the production of cereals. And when I say cereals, I'm talking cereal grains, not like, Cheerios or Kix or Raisin Bran or what have you. So cereals like corn and those kinds of grains. So there were better agronomic practices, increased use of fertilizer and irrigation, greatly improved seed genetics, and hybrid corn was combined with genetic selection to increase the yields of corn. So the advent of agricultural biotechnology with genetically modified seed reduces losses due to weeds and other pests. So just to kind of show you how this actually works kind of with numbers. So for corn yield in the US, for example, the average corn yield has increased tremendously during the 20th century. So from 1860 to the 1920s, we were getting about 26 bushels per acre. And in 1940, that number had increased to 39.1 bushels per acre. By 1990, it was 161 bushels per acre. In 2000, 187, and then in 2004, we were at 202 bushels per acre. So that's a really tremendous increase over that period of time. So that was in the US. So for the global corn yield, global increases in the yield of maize or corn in million metric tons were also seen in other countries. So for the US, we went from 201.5 to 282.3. China was at 97.2, and they went up to 139.5. Brazil from 21.3 to 35.1. Argentina from 5.4 to 20.4. India from 9 to 14.7, and France from 9.4 to 13.8. So there have been marked increases in yield for wheat, rice, and other cereal grains. So moving on and discussing, more about the grains. The Green Revolution brought genetically improved high-yielding dwarf wheat and rice to the developing world. And so when we say the developing world, particularly Asia and Latin America, it was used in combination with improved agronomic practices, such as better fertilizer and irrigation practices, and there was a six-fold increase in grain production because of this. China actually became a net exporter of grain because their yield was so high. So the person that kind of started the Green Revolution is Norman Borlaug. I guess I'm saying that right. So he was born in 1914 in Cresco, Iowa. And Iowa and the Midwest and that whole region is huge for corn. That's why a lot of pig production and poultry production and things like that are in the Midwest, because they have a lot of corn. So he was the father of the Green Revolution. He actually led the research at the International Maize and Wheat Improvement Center. And that CIMMYT is based on the acronym for its name in Spanish. And I'm not fluent in Spanish, so I'm not going to even attempt to pronounce that. And that research was done in Mexico. This resulted in high-yielding, disease-resistant dwarf wheat. So he then persuaded leaders of developing countries to adopt new varieties of wheat and other cereals, including rice. He actually received the Nobel Peace Prize in 1970 and later was awarded the Presidential Medal of Freedom and Congressional Gold Medal. So quite the achievements there. He founded the World Food Prize, which gives recognition to food and agriculture pioneers throughout the world. So kind of talking a little bit more about corn. Corn is used for a lot of different things all over the world. It's used in food, such as tortillas, cornflakes, corn chips, or just if you want to eat regular corn. It's a major ingredient in livestock feed, as I kind of mentioned a little bit earlier, particularly for pigs, poultry, and feedlot cattle. We'll discuss corn a little bit more later in the semester, but corn is a huge energy feed, and it's a really good feed for those livestock animals. So it's used in a lot of different ways. It's also a raw material to produce ethanol that can be added to gasoline, and corn silage can be used as a diet for cattle. It's synonymous with maize in most of the U.S., but actually, just to kind of show you some differences between countries, in England, corn actually means wheat. So just something to think about if you ever encounter someone from England and you talk about corn. So the word corn means most prevalent cereal or grain that's produced in a specific region. So now we're going to talk a little bit about animal agriculture in the developing world. Remember, this is just kind of an introduction chapter to kind of give you a very general overview. So we'll be kind of diving into more of this throughout the semester. So livestock makes a significant contribution to the poor in developing countries. It's estimated that about 60% of income actually comes from livestock. Livestock are a good way to provide a route out of the poverty trap, because they can not only provide a source of cash, but they can also provide a source of other products such as milk and egg and hides. So animals and livestock can provide high quality nutrition that's derived from food from the animals, milk, meat, and eggs. So you can feed, a pig corn and soybean meal diet is typically what we go with, and they can turn that plant-based diet into some really nutritious foods, and then we can get meat and pork from a pig. And the same with chickens and cows. They can turn that feed into high quality products that are very nutritious. So in the developing world, and really all over, livestock can provide power for plowing. They can also provide manure that can fertilize the soil. And dried cattle dung can actually be used as fuel in Asia and Africa. Livestock contribute to economic vitality in rural communities in the U.S. as well as in other developed countries. So if you have any questions about this, you can ask your proctors. I know Tom is probably there. Or if you have any other questions, feel free to post them in the discussion board under the question section. Feel free to email me whatever you need. If you haven't already posted in the introduction thread on the discussion board, please do that. I really enjoy reading those and learning more about each of you, and I would encourage you to not only write your own, but maybe get on there and read some about your classmates to kind of get a sense of who you're in the room with or in the class with. And also for those of you that are taking the class online as well, please do that. We look forward to learning about you. And that's all I have for today. So I will see you all on next Tuesday. Have a good day.